clearly underlying their action. And all the mortgage letters must go through departmental clearance and be viewed by OMB before they become official guidance. So I'm asking that this amendment be accepted to clarify the action of the bill itself. Thank you.
Does the gentleman yield back?
Continue to reserve.
The gentleman reserves? Pardon me? The gentleman may not reserve.
Okay, then I don't reserve.
The gentleman yields back. The gentlelady from Illinois.
Madam Chairman, I rise to claim time in opposition.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. This amendment came up in committee and failed during our committee markup by a vote of 33 to 22. And the amendment removes all references to the mortgage letter issued by HUD concerning the FHA refinance program. And I think that this announcement was the defining document for the program and provided guidance to lenders on the FHA refinance program. But I think our concern is that the amendment leaves the door open for the Treasury and for HUD to create another substantially similar program to the FHA refinance program at a later date, again without the express consent of Congress. And as the sponsor of the bill mentioned, this program was never authorized by Congress, and the funding came from the TARP monies that were set aside for the HAMP program, and the mortgagee letter was effectively the authorizing document for the program. And if this were to be in, it would not there would be no nullification of the program, and it wouldn't be terminated. And I think that this is directly to this mortgage letter is directly to this program. So I don't think that it affects the other parts of the FHA. And really just voids the letter in doing so to end the program. And I don't think that we need to further burden FHA with this program. An FHA program right now is currently operating below its congressionally mandated 2% capital reserve ratio. And I think that this program has the potential to further expose taxpayers to FHA losses. And even I think the administration has expressed concerns over the new program loan performance. During testimony delivered to the Financial Services Committee, the FHA commissioner testified that, and I quote, "These loans may perform worse than refinance loans that were not previously underwater," end quote. So I just think it's another example of the administration using TARP dollars in questionable ways. And I think that the program is similar in scope to the failed Hope for Homeowners program established under FHA in 2008. And that program has even helped fewer than 200 borrowers since its inception. So we're concerned that the method of funding for this program exposes taxpayers to higher levels of TARP money. I don't think that it affects FHA other than this program is terminated. So this program, along with its companion programs in the failed HEMP program, should be terminated, and all unobligated funds associated with the program should instead be used to pay down the nation's unsustainable debt. And I would oppose the amendment.
The gentlelady yields back the balance of her time.
Madam Chair.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Massachusetts rise?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, I regret the fact that my colleague from Massachusetts, who is a good lawyer and a careful student of what we do, has drafted a very specific amendment aimed at a particular point, and he's been answered with a lot of general rhetoric. I don't think his point was understood. The gentlewoman simply repeated general rhetoric about the bill. He's not trying by the back door to reestablish this program. He has talked to thoughtful people, and he is worried about an overreach. And I think the only thing we're seeing now is pride of authorship by whoever drafted this bill for them. And the gentleman from Illinois is, as I said, using a lot of general rhetoric, totally unresponsive to the very specific point my friend from Massachusetts made. And with that, in the hope that he might, if he says it again, get them to pay attention to the specifics, I yield to my friend.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, I will concede that the gentlelady from Illinois has raised a lot of good points, but unfortunately none of them, which is what you just talked about, that remains intact. That remains intact. Basically, what you have done in the bill is it says effective on the date of the act, there are rescinded and permanently canceled all unexpended balances remaining available as of such date of enactment of the amounts made available under Title I of the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act. So you've cut out the top, and you say it can't be used for mortgages. And I left that language alone. But then, and in that section you identify specifically mortgage letter 2010-23, and you say nothing can be used for that. And I'm not trying to turn over that apple cart. However, when you go to Section 3, you say that the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development may not issue any regulation, any order, any notice, or any mortgage letter based on or substantially similar to such mortgage letter referred to above. Okay? So what you're saying is no notice, no orders, no mortgage letter, no communications on voluntary agreements between the bank, the lender, the servicer, and the homeowner. So you're prohibiting FHA from working out a voluntary agreement with any of your constituents.
Gentlemen, let me take back my time and
Sure.
ask my friend. I'll yield to him again. The problem is the ambiguity of substantially similar. It kills this program, but it bans things that would be substantially similar so that innovative private sector entities trying to do something would be deterred because no one can tell them what substantially similar is. I'll yield to my friend.
The gentleman is correct. And
I've yielded to the gentleman from Massachusetts.
Gentleman from Massachusetts
it's
is
my time.
recognized.
Okay.
The gentleman want me to yield to?
All right. Well, let me just say this. The idea here, it's a two-step problem. One, the gentlelady's bill would seek to eliminate voluntary agreements. Okay, so that's a problem because we're asking the FHA and the homeowner and the lender and the servicer all to agree that this mortgage should be modified and that the homeowner should be allowed to remain in their home, which is a good thing. But for some reason, you don't want any of that. So you're eliminating all four of those programs. That's a problem. The underlying problem that we have here, specific to this language, is compounded by the fact that you're eliminating all voluntary agreements, not only the ones that you seek to eliminate in these four voluntary programs.
Let me at this point yield to the gentleman from Illinois then to respond.
Thank you. I think that what we are doing here is to terminate the mortgage letter which sets up the program and to make sure that there won't be a similar, substantially
Well, I'll
similar
take back
letter.
my time because the gentlewoman is simply not responding. We gave the same general rhetoric. The point, as my friend has pointed out, is you have introduced an ambiguity with this substantially similar so that people will be deterred from further innovative activities. And
Will the gentleman yield? That's exactly.
I yield again to my friend from
That's
Massachusetts.
exactly what we're doing.
I yield again to my friend from Massachusetts.
Right. Thank you, Madam Chair. The funding authorization you've already deleted in Section 2. So there's no funds and there's no authorization for FHA to issue a letter in connection with a program that no longer exists. So you've eliminated that. But what you're going further in Section 3 is saying, and we don't want you issuing a letter or a notice or an order that is substantially similar to the one we just eliminated. That's the problem, that you're taking the ability of FHA to work out voluntary agreements that I think on the merits for the people in your district you would like to see occur, that are in good faith and that are affecting homeowners.
Time's expired.
Okay. Thank you,
For what
Madam Chair.
purpose does the gentlelady from New York rise?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady from New York is recognized for 5 minutes.
Congresswoman Biggert, do you know how many underwater mortgages there are in your home state?
No, I don't.
The
Well,
gentlewoman
there
from New York
are
is
over
advised.
400
The gentlewoman from New York is
re-
advised to address her remarks through the chair.
Reclaiming my time. There are 431,000 mortgages that are underwater in the great state of Illinois, where the residents would be eligible to participate in this program that the Republican majority is voting to terminate. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts, and those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed will say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it, the noes have it. The amendment from Massachusetts.
On the assumption that 3 beats nothing, I ask for a recorded vote.
Pursuant to Clause 6 of Rule 18, further proceedings on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Massachusetts will be postponed. For what purpose does the gentleman from Minnesota rise?
Have an amendment at the desk, Madam Speaker.
Clerk will designate.
Amendment number 4, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Paulson of Minnesota.
Gentleman from Minnesota is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Last summer I met with a woman whose husband was born and raised in Eden Prairie, Minnesota, had died in Afghanistan, and we discussed issues that she was facing as the widow of a service member. And one of the concerns she raised was absolutely paying her mortgage given all the changes and stresses that had taken place in her life. And this conversation led me to introduce legislation last year, which actually passed the House last fall, that directed the appropriate agencies to take into account and consideration the special circumstances of wounded service members and widows of fallen soldiers and their families in housing programs. And along those lines, this amendment and my amendment today would add military service members and veterans who have service-related injuries, as well as survivors and dependents of such individuals, to be included in the study on the use of the FHA refinance program. These families do face often new hardships. They may need modification to their houses if the service member is now in a wheelchair. They may have significant changes in their ability to move around, as well as the skills they are able to perform, which could have a significant impact on their livelihood. And it's my hope, Madam Speaker, through this amendment we can get a better understanding of how we can best provide these families who have made that service and sacrifice. And I yield back and urge adoption of the amendment.
Gentleman yields back. The question says the gentleman from Massachusetts rise.
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from Massachusetts recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Chair, the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, in the committee offered amendments that would have provided some substantive protection to veterans. My Republican colleagues neither wanted to provide help for the veterans nor be caught not providing the help. So they came up with some study amendments that would give them the appearance of being concerned, but no reality. That was unfortunately adopted over Mr. Green's objections and mine, but it's part of the bill. This is an addition to what is largely a cosmetic amendment, and I see no reason to object to it or prolong the debate, so I urge everybody to vote for it.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. For what purpose does the gentlelady from New York rise?
To be recognized for 1 minute.
Does the gentlelady move to strike the last word?
Okay. Thank you.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
Congressman Paulson, I would like to ask you,
Gentlelady is advised to direct her remarks through the chair.
I would like to inquire from Congressman Paulson if he is aware of how many mortgages are underwater in his home state, the great state of Minnesota.
Gentleman from Minnesota,
and I will yield to him.
Do you yield to the gentleman from Minnesota? The gentleman from Minnesota, recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And Congresswoman, I'm not aware of the exact number, and the amendment applies actually for addition to the study, but be happy if you'd share that information.
Reclaiming my time.
Gentlelady reclaims her time.
I would like to point out to the gentleman from Minnesota that there are over 90,000 homes, 90,000 homeowners who are underwater in the great state of Minnesota and that could benefit if they meet the criteria in this important program that the Republican majority is urging to be eliminated today. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlelady yields back the balance of her time. The question is on the amendment offered by the gentleman from Minnesota, and those in favor will signify by saying aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The amendment is agreed to.
Madam Chair.
For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate, or excuse me, the clerk will read.
Amendment number 12, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Inslee of Washington.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois rise?
And I reserve a point of order against this amendment.
Point of order is reserved. Gentleman from Washington is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Chair, we know how dire the situation is for tens of thousands of Americans with underwater mortgages who are making good faith efforts to make the right decisions both for themselves and for the lender. And we are very concerned that if this program prematurely is destroyed, we will be yanking back a lifeline that Congress has sent to these folks. And of course, this is important because it's not just the people who own these homes that are underwater right now that are affected by the collapse in housing values, but all of us are, because that housing debacle has affected employment in the construction trades and the real estate industry broadly. We all have a stake in this issue. So what my amendment would do is to basically say that we want the FHA, if in fact this situation moves forward like this bill is, that they will conduct a study and essentially implement a substitute program that will fix anything that needs fixing in this program to achieve the ends that we ought to be able to have as our goal. Now, the basic underlying theory of our amendment is simple. Before you take away a lifeline from some American to solve a problem that thousands are experiencing, come up with a substitute, come up with an improvement, come up with an alternative, and that's what our amendment simply says. If we're going to eliminate this program in its current embodiment, let's come up with an alternative and have it implemented in a way that we keep this lifeline out there. Now, the reason we feel that this is important is that all too frequently in this Congress, we have seen the majority party remove these solutions to programs and not replace it with an alternative. We've seen this in health care, where they have wanted to remove a health care program, arguing it's ineffective or they think they have a better program, but not come up with a substitute to replace it. That's not good enough. Americans deserve better. Same thing with Environmental Protection Agency. Today, my friends in the majority party sought in the Commerce Committee to eliminate protection against airborne pollutants that are hurting human health, but not come up with any alternative to solve that problem. Now, we want to join in a bipartisan fashion. If there are impediments or imperfections in this bill, let's come up with a solution. Let's not allow those Americans to be hanging out there without a lifeline. My amendment would do that, and I would commend it to my fellows, and I would yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Washington yields back the balance of his time. Gentlelady from Illinois is recognized for 5 minutes. What purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois rise?
Madam Chairman, I make a point of order against the amendment because in our opinion it violates Clause 7 of Rule 16, which requires that an amendment be germane to the matter it's amending.
Any other member wish to be heard on the point of order?
I be heard of the point of order, Madam Chair.
Gentleman from Washington is recognized.
Thank you. Briefly, I would hope that the Chair would consider a couple salient points. Number one, it is our intent, and I believe universal intent, that by this amendment we don't intend to change the basic nature of this program. It does apply this benefit to those homeowners who are current on their mortgage obligations. We would intend that that standard and condition would continue. And I would point out to the Chair, the language of our amendment specifically says that this program would only be carried out under, quote, appropriate guidelines and standards, close quote. We think this solves that problem. We seek our congressional intent to continue. We hope that the members will be able to be heard on this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other member wish to be heard on the point of order? If not, the Chair is prepared to rule. The gentlelady from Illinois makes a point of order that the amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington is not germane. The bill addresses repeal of a Federal Housing Administration program that provides for refinancing of a specified set of mortgages. One of the fundamental principles of germaneness is that the amendment relate to the subject matter of the underlying bill. The bill is confined to a specific type of refinancing program. The amendment seeks to address a different type of refinancing program, a matter outside the confines of the subject addressed by the bill. The amendment is therefore not germane. The point of order is sustained. Are there additional amendments?
Madam Speaker,
For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia rise?
I move to strike the last word.
Gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, I rise today for each and every person who owns a home. I rise today for every American who has struggled to pay their mortgage each month. I rise for every person who has watched their home, their piece of the American dream, slip away because they lost their job through no fault of their own, or because they got cancer or no longer able to work and pay their medical bills. I rise to condemn what these bills are trying to do today. Make no mistake, repealing these programs will close the door on the American dream for more and more Americans. Madam Speaker, when I was a young boy, my family did not own a home. My father was a sharecropper. My mother and father had to go without for years. They saved and they saved, they prayed, they waited. My father could never get a mortgage. Mortgages were not available where we live. They were not available for families like mine. It's just the way it was. In 1944, my parents bought a house with 3 rooms and 110 acres outside of a small town called Troy in rural Alabama. It cost us $300. I couldn't imagine that much money changing hands at once. I look around this chamber and I see some suits in this room that cost much more than what my father paid. Up until the time she died, my mother spoke about the day we moved, how proud she was. It was a huge achievement for us. It changed everything. That house, that land, it was ours. Looking back, I can't imagine what it would have been like to have lost it all for reasons beyond my father's control. The harvest or the weather, or because it would fix someone else's bottom line. Madam Speaker, I know that buying a house is the biggest decision most people will ever make, and it is the greatest source of pride. For most people that dream, their dream is their house. It was for me. When I bought my house, I thought of my mother and my father. His house made it possible for me to buy mine. This American dream, it is built from hard work, but that dream is also made of bricks and mortar. It's the house. Madam Speaker, it is a home, and this chamber is shutting the door on that house. They're locking the door on the American dream. These 2 bills today would end 2 new programs that are helping struggling homeowners who have lost their jobs through no fault of their own. To me, it is unthinkable. Madam Speaker, I strongly oppose H.R. 836 and H.R. 830. We must stand up for the American homeowner. We must stand in their corner. We must not walk away from them in their time of need. I urge all of my colleagues to stand with me and defeat these bills. Don't lock the door on the American dream. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Gentleman from Georgia yields back. Are there any other amendments to Section 3 of the bill under consideration? If not, the chair is prepared to entertain other amendments. For what purpose does the gentlelady from California rise?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will read. Can the gentlelady please specify which amendment she is offering?
This would be amendment number 5.
Clerk will read.
Amendment number 5, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Ms. Waters of California.
What purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois
Madam
rise?
Chairman, I reserve a point of order against this amendment.
A point of order is reserved by the gentlelady from Illinois. The gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes on her amendment.
Madam Speaker, my amendment would mandate that the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development and the Secretary of the Treasury conduct a study on the negative impacts of underwater mortgage loans or loans where the borrower owes more than the house is worth on the housing market and the economy of the United States and report those findings to Congress. Importantly, the report would also include recommendations to Congress on how to mitigate the effects of these underwater mortgages. Before I go any further talking about these underwater mortgages, I think it is extremely important for me to help everyone understand that my friends on the opposite side of the aisle are moving to eliminate all of the programs that we have worked so hard to develop. Good, strong public policy to assist homeowners of America in a number of ways. They are eliminating this FHA program that will assist with refinance on homes that are underwater. They're eliminating the HAMP program that we're going to hear more about. They're eliminating the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, commonly referred to as NSP. And they're eliminating the program for homeowners who find themselves out of a job, who would be able to borrow and, of course, to pay back the money that is loaned to them that they cannot afford to pay their mortgages because of the loss of the job. So while they're eliminating all of the programs that many of us have worked so hard to develop, in the former Congress, I was the chair of the Subcommittee on Housing and Community Opportunity. And so I know these programs very well. Not only do I know these programs very well, I understand very well what has happened here in America that has caused homeowners to be in the situations that they're in now. We have a situation that occurred that created this crisis with the subprime meltdown. We had loans that were initiated in this country that were exotic loans, loans that were teaser loans, no documentation loans, liar loans, loans that reset. People were encouraged to sign up for mortgages that they did not understand. Now we have millions of Americans, really through no fault of their own. And I've said once and I'll say it again, that all of a sudden homeowners didn't decide that they were going to default, that somehow they weren't going to pay their bills. It certainly didn't happen like that. It happened because of what I've just alluded to, all of the tricks and the fraud that were perpetrated on American homeowners who were simply trying to live the American dream. And so we don't have the numbers in committee anymore or on this floor. My friends on the opposite side of the aisle are in control. They have the majority, and they're going to eliminate the programs. We have made every argument possible that you can make in committee to try and hold on to these programs. As you have seen on the floor today, we have the gentlelady from New York who are reminding them how many homes they have underwater. And, of course, they know because they're getting the calls, just as we're getting the calls, when homeowners begging of assistance. And so, while we won't be able to stop them, I am trying to make sure that at least we do this study so that we can help to bring to light what has taken place and how these underwater mortgages pose a severe threat to our economy. If you owe more than your home is worth, you can't pick up and move. If you get a new job, you're stuck. That impedes our economic recovery. Likewise, you can't move if you want to go attend school somewhere, and you can't move in order to care for an elderly parent. The chief economist for First American CoreLogic noted last month that negative equity is a significant drag on both the housing market and on economic growth. It is driving foreclosures and decreasing mobility for millions of homeowners. Since we expect home prices to slightly increase during 2010, negative equity will remain the dominant issue in the housing and mortgage markets for some time to come. The FHA refinance program is a modest step to address the problem of underwater mortgages. This program would provide that if banks agree to at least a 10% principal write-down for the borrower can then refinance into an FHA loan. Only borrowers current on their mortgages, not those in default, qualify for the program. And so this study will help people to understand the impact that's having. I ask for an aye vote on my amendment.
Gentlelady, gentlelady from Illinois, rise.
Madam Chairman, I make a point of order against the amendment because, in our opinion, it violates Clause 7 of Rule 16, which requires that an amendment be germane to the matter it is amending. It is not germane to the bill because it expands the scope of the bill. And I ask for a ruling of the Chair.
Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I move to strike the last word, I suppose. If we terminate a program, we should understand the impacts of such a termination. And so this is relevant. The Republicans say...
He needs to speak to the point of order.
This is the point of order. The point of order...
Gentlelady may proceed.
The point of order indicates that this is not germane. I am maintaining that this is germane because if we terminate a program, we should understand the impact of such termination. I believe that does speak to the point of order. The Republicans say that this program doesn't work. So our regulators should suggest to Congress what they think will work. This is just a study. This is not a new program or an extension of the FHA short refinance program. I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Does any other member wish to speak to the point of order? If not, the Chair is prepared to rule on the point of order. The gentlelady from Illinois makes a point of order that the amendment offered by the gentlelady from California is not germane. The bill addresses repeal of a federal housing administration program that provides for refinancing of a specified set of mortgages. One of the fundamental principles of germaneness is that the amendment relate to the subject matter of the underlying bill. The bill is confined to a specific type of refinancing program. The amendment seeks to address mortgages more generally, a matter outside the confines of the subject addressed by the bill. The amendment is therefore not germane. The point of order is sustained. Presents the gentlelady from California, rise.
Madam Chairman, I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will designate.
And I yield.
The clerk will designate.
Amendment number 15, printed in the congressional record, offered by Ms. Loretta Sanchez of California.
Madam Chair.
Represents the gentlelady from Illinois, rise.
Madam Chair, I reserve a point of order against this amendment.
Point of order is reserved. Gentlelady from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise today in support of this amendment that I'm sponsoring. My amendment replaces the FHA Refinance Program Termination Act, which, of course, would allow the use of unexpended funds to create a program that will allow qualifying homeowners to apply to refinance a 30-year mortgage at 4%, as long as the mortgage they're refinancing is on their primary home, that they are up to date on their mortgage, and that their annual income, adjusted gross income, does not exceed $180,000. People back home are hurting, and they're desperate to keep their home. I know that there are many who have lost their homes. There are some who are on back payments. They haven't kept up with their payments. But what about the people who actually have held on to their home? They've actually paid. They've actually had to give up their car. They're walking to work. They're taking the bus because they understand how important it is for them to hold on to their house, because a house is just not a house. Your primary residence is your home. It's where your kids are. It's where they find a stable life. So this program Well, every program is not perfect. There's not a perfect program we've come up with. We have tried to help people who have been losing their houses, people who, through no fault of their own, who have either lost their jobs, have had to take a lesser job, who were swindled, who were talked into loans they didn't understand what they were signing because they were hit by the subprime lenders and they're paying too much. There are people out there sometimes paying in the double digits with respect to their loan. Maybe they're at 10% or 9.5% or 12% on their loan. This program would actually say to those who somehow have held on, we're going to refinance your primary home at 4%. Because there are a lot of people who could do this and their payment would come down significantly. But today, they can't refinance. The refinance today on a 30-year loan is 4.9%. There are a lot of people who are paying 8%. It means a lot. It could be anywhere between $2,000 and $2,000 in their payment a month. But they can't qualify. They don't have the chunk of money they need. They don't, their home is under water, etc. So this is a very important thing we could do. Let's take the money. Let's take that money that we have not spent on this program and let's put it to help the people who have done the right thing. The people who, no matter what, have continued to pay on their loans, because there are many of them out there, and I would hope that my colleagues and that we could find a compromise, that we could find a way in which we can keep people in their homes. No program is perfect, but I think we have the opportunity to do the right thing, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Gentlelady from California yields back the time. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois rise?
Madam Chairman, I make a point of order against this amendment because it violates Clause 10 of Rule 21, as it has the net effect of increasing mandatory spending within the time period set forth in the rule.
For what does any other member wish to speak to the point of order?
I do wish to speak to that point of order.
The gentlelady from California is recognized.
Madam Chair, this is about eliminating a program. I understand that, you know, those people who are behind on their payments, you're just going to let them go. You're just going to let them lose their homes. Then they're going to have a hard time finding an apartment. I understand that. But this is about helping the people who truly, the middle class, the lower income class, who have a home, who need to hold on to that home. And I do believe that this is germane to the underlying bill. So I respectfully request that we consider this amendment.
Does any other member wish to speak to the point of order? If not, the chair is prepared to rule. The gentlewoman from Illinois makes a point of order that the amendment offered by the gentlewoman from California violates Clause 10 of Rule 21 by proposing an increase in mandatory spending over a relevant period of time. Pursuant to Clause 10 of Rule 21 and Clause 4 of Rule 29, the chair is authoritatively guided by estimates from the chair of the Committee on the Budget that the net effect of the provisions in the amendment would increase mandatory spending over a relevant period of time as compared to the bill. Accordingly, the point of order is sustained and the amendment is not in order. Seeks recognition. For what purpose does the gentleman from Washington rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will... Can the gentleman specify the amendment that he is offering?
Number 14, Inslee number 14, Madam Chair.
The clerk will designate.
Amendment number 14, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Inslee of Washington.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois rise?
Madam Chairman, I reserve a point of order against this amendment.
A point of order is reserved. The gentleman from Washington is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, one thing that I think there is universal anger about, Republicans and Democrats, independents alike in this country, is the lack of responsibility that has been shown, criminal responsibility for the huge malfeasance and criminality that got us into this economic pickle that we are in. To my knowledge, there has been not one person go to jail as a result of the economic collapse precipitated by the shenanigans and outright criminality in the highest financial places in the land. And all Americans, I think, are very angry with justifiable reasons about that. And if you read any of the books about the collapse on Wall Street, you will share that anger if you read any of those books. We do not want to see that replicated in this scandal regarding the mortgage servicing situation. We are now advised that there are multiple cases of people signing affidavits that were false knowingly. We are told there are numerous occasions of this robo-signing situation, and these nefarious acts have resulted in losses by Americans that should not have happened. And we want to send a message that, on a bipartisan basis, that the criminal laws need to be respected. And our bill, our amendment, would simply call upon the Attorney Generals, both federal and state, to prosecute, as appropriate, these criminal violations. Our amendment does not change the responsibility under the criminal statutes for any officers or directors. If they are not personally responsible for these wrongful acts, there's no criminal liability. But we do think where there is violations of these criminal statutes, they ought to be prosecuted. And this nation has been brought to the brink of financial ruin because of many, many instances of violation of these standards. And it's the least we can ask is that we prosecute these cases where it is appropriate. So we think it's the right thing for us to do on a bipartisan basis to make that statement today. I hope that members will join me in making that statement and make sure justice, in fact, is meted out here where it has not in other instances. And with that, I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Washington yields back the balance of his time. The gentlelady from Illinois, for what purpose does she rise?
Madam Chairman, I make a point of order against the amendment because, in my opinion, it violates Clause 7 of Rule 16, which requires that an amendment be germane to the matter it is amending. It is not germane to the bill because it is outside the scope of the bill.
Does a member wish to speak to the point of order? The gentlelady from California.
I rise to speak to the point of order. I do think this amendment is germane for a number of reasons. The gentleman talked about the fact that this country was almost brought to the brink of total disaster because of this subprime meltdown, and he pointed to things that have already been identified that we can put squarely on the shoulders of the servicers who are responsible for the management of these mortgages after they have been packaged, securitized, and then sent on their way to be collected on. So this gentleman is talking about the fact that many of these services, when they are trying to collect on these mortgages, can see that fraud has taken place, but they do nothing about it. They can see that amendments have been slipped in that the homeowners did not know about. They can see that sometimes the signature does not even belong to the homeowner, but they continue to try and collect on these mortgages. I think that this amendment is germane. I would ask that the chair rule in favor of this amendment. It is time somebody paid a price for what has been done to the American public.
Madam Chairman,
does any other member wish to speak to the point of order? If not, the chair is prepared to rule. The gentlelady from Illinois makes a point of order that the amendment offered by the gentleman from Washington is not germane. The bill addresses repeal of a Federal Housing Administration program that provides for refinancing of a specified set of mortgages. One of the fundamental principles of germaneness is that the amendment relate to the subject matter of the underlying bill. The bill is confined to a specific type of refinancing program. The amendment seeks to address foreclosures generally, a matter outside the confines of the subject addressed by the bill. The amendment is therefore not germane, and the point of order is sustained. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Hawaii rise?
Madam Speaker, I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady is recognized for 5 minutes.
An amendment earlier offered directing the Secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD, and the Secretary of Treasury to study the negative impacts of underwater mortgages on the housing market and on the U.S. economy, and to report the findings of this study to Congress, including recommendations on how to mitigate the effects of these mortgages, makes eminent sense to me. About 12 to 15 million homeowners, nearly 1/4 of homeowners in this country, are currently underwater on their mortgages, meaning that they owe more on their mortgages than their homes are worth. These borrowers are diligently making their mortgage payments, but need some kind of lifeline to reduce their debt burden. We all agree that we need to look at ways to cut government spending to address our country's fiscal crisis, but what is the purpose of this underlying bill? Why are my colleagues on the other side of the aisle trying to end programs that were established to assist families suffering from the foreclosure crisis without offering any plan or remedy to help the millions of Americans who are trying to stay in their homes? Families in every single one of our congressional districts are desperately seeking help to stay in their homes. The American dream. Last year, I met with an owner of a car dealership in Kihei, Maui. This constituent had a successful business until the economic downturn reduced the number of her car sales. Increasingly, former customers of hers were returning to her dealership to return the cars that they had purchased from her, handing back their keys because they could no longer afford to make their car payments. This car dealer eventually found herself in dire straits, so much so that her lender wanted to put her dream home up for a short sale. She didn't understand why the lender was only considering a short sale and didn't want to work with her to help keep her house. It was only when my office contacted the lender on her behalf that she was able to receive a forbearance on a portion of the principal and get a permanent modification. Sadly, stories like hers are commonplace these days. The federal foreclosure mitigation programs, which unfortunately have not helped as many homeowners as we would like, still provide a lifeline. Without these programs, many more lenders would be pursuing short sales and foreclosures rather than trying to help meet homeowners halfway and helping them keep their homes. The FHA refinance program, also known as the FHA short refinance option, assists underwater borrowers by facilitating voluntary mortgage principal write-downs and refinancing the loans into a new, stable FHA-insured mortgage, thereby enabling borrowers to have a reduced monthly payment and a mortgage that is more aligned to the actual property values. FHA just started implementing this program a few months ago. We need to give the agency time to get it off the ground. We should also focus on what can be done to make the programs more effective so that the maximum number of underwater borrowers who are eligible for the program can benefit. Instead of coming up with new initiatives to assist thousands of homeowners or working to improve existing foreclosure mitigation programs, bills like this will only serve to destabilize an already fragile housing market and further delay our economic recovery. With bills like this, the House majority continues to turn their backs on the middle-class families in our country. Let's focus on what can be done now to stabilize the housing market, create jobs, and get the economy back on track. I urge my colleagues to vote against the underlying bill. I yield back my time.
Gentlelady from Hawaii yields back the balance of her time. Who seeks recognition? For what purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
Could the gentleman tell us the amendment that he's offering?
Number 8, I believe it is.
The clerk will designate.
Amendment number 8, printed in the congressional record, offered by Mr. Holt of New Jersey.
Gentleman from New Jersey. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois rise?
Madam Chairman, I reserve a point of order against this amendment.
A point of order is reserved. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank the Chair. Instead of focusing on job creation, innovation, retirement security, or fair taxes, today we're considering legislation that would terminate a program that has the potential to help struggling homeowners stay in their homes. We're not here to debate fixing the program or to consider replacing it with a more effective alternative. Rather, we're here to end the program that is only a few months old, to declare it a failure and go home. This is not good government. It will not help the middle class. This is not what my constituents sent me to Washington to do. New Jerseyans, as so many around the country, are burdened by high property taxes. While we allow individuals who itemize their federal taxes to deduct state and local taxes, many non-itemizers, particularly retirees on fixed incomes, feel the impact of high rates. The amendment before us that I present would provide real help to millions of homeowners, especially senior citizens, across the country, yes, and in central New Jersey, my district. Specifically, my amendment would renew for 5 years the property tax deduction for American homeowners who don't itemize on their federal taxes. It would allow single filers to deduct $500 and joint filers to deduct $1,000 on top of the standard deduction and index these additional deductions for inflation. This property tax provision, based on legislation that I wrote that was signed into law by former President Bush in 2008 and was extended through the 2009 tax year, would continue that. Unfortunately, although the extension of this tax credit for the 2010 was passed by this House, it failed to become law. So that is why on the first day of this Congress, I introduced the Universal Homeowners Tax Relief Act. And with this amendment, we have the opportunity to pass my legislation to provide an estimated 30 million people nationwide and 600,000 in New Jersey with a few extra $100 that I'm sure they could use. In these uncertain economic times, it is no small matter. And unlike the bill before us today, my amendment would provide real help for American homeowners. I urge passage of the amendment.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois rise?
Madam Chairman, I make a point of order against this amendment because, in my opinion, it violates Clause 7 of Rule 16, which requires that an amendment be germane to the matter it is amending, and it is not germane to the bill because it's outside the scope of the bill.
Does any other member wish to be heard on the point of order?
Madam Chair.
Gentleman from New Jersey.
I recognize that under the structure of this bill, this amendment is not in order. I only say it should be.
Does any other member wish to speak to the point of order? Gentlelady from California.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I rise to support the amendment. I'm opposed to the point of order. I think it is absolutely germane. Not only do we have a bill before us that will eliminate the taxpayers' ability to have their homes that are underwater refinanced, this also impacts their taxes. They will continue to have to be taxed on those homes at the same rate. And so here we have before us the Universal Homeowner Tax Relief Act that would impact 30 million Americans nationwide. And I must add that if we can, in this House and in this Congress, give tax breaks to the richest 1% of Americans in the way that we have done, certainly we can support these homeowners who are underwater, these homeowners who have been tricked into mortgages that they didn't understand, these homeowners who are the victims of fraud, and I think this is germane.
The gentlelady will confine her remarks to the point of order. Does any other member wish to speak to the point of order? If not, the chair is prepared to rule. The gentlelady from Illinois makes a point of order that the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey is not germane. The bill addresses repeal of a Federal Housing Administration program that provides for refinancing of a specified set of mortgages. One of the fundamental principles of germaneness is that the amendment confine itself to the jurisdiction of the committees represented in the underlying bill. The bill was referred to and reported by the Committee on Financial Services. The amendment proposes a direct amendment to the Internal Revenue Code, a matter within the jurisdiction of the Committee on Ways and Means. The amendment is therefore not germane. The point of order is sustained. Who seeks recognition? For what purpose does the gentleman from California rise?
I have an amendment at the desk.
The clerk will designate.
Amendment number 7, printed in the Congressional Record, offered by Mr. Garamendi of California.
For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois rise?
Madam Chairman, I reserve a point of order against this amendment.
The point of order is reserved. The gentleman from California is recognized for 5 minutes.
Madam Speaker, 10 weeks ago on this floor there was great celebration by our colleagues in the Republican Party as they took control of this House. And there were many sermons given to all of us by the members in the majority party about the need to listen to Americans. I suggest we do that at this moment as we consider this bill. 10 million 780,236 American families are crying out for help. We should be listening to them. I know that the gentle lady from, Madam Speaker, the gentle lady from Illinois has a big heart, and she knows that 430,000 of the homeowners in Illinois are crying out for relief. And I'm certain, Madam Speaker, that the author of this bill, the gentleman from Alabama, is well aware that in his state, 35,000 homeowners are crying out for relief. And I'm certain that all of the members of the Republican Party are listening to the 10,780,236 families in America that are crying out for relief. I can assure you the Democrats are listening. My amendment, Madam Speaker, is one that goes to one of the three reasons why they are crying out for relief. There was no regulation imposed during the years 2001 to 2009. Attempted to address that with the Frank Dodd law that's now in place. The second reason was irresponsibility. And certainly some of those homeowners who are crying out for relief were irresponsible, and certainly some of those who lost their homes already were crying out for relief were irresponsible. But the big irresponsibility were the bankers in this nation that took advantage of millions upon millions of homeowners and engaged in irresponsible activity. The third item is where my amendment goes, and that is to Wall Street greed. We know from the commission that was assigned the responsibility of looking at why the great crash occurred, we know from that report that greed was the underlying motivation for Wall Street. My amendment goes to that greed. In the future, not in the past, and some of my colleagues have spoken to the need for criminal action, which is also part of that report done by the Commission. This goes to the future. This amendment goes to the future and says, for those in Wall Street, the high and the mighty that get the huge bonuses, most of which were just in the newspaper this week, that their bonuses should be in the stock of the company in which they are operating, and that those bonuses be held in an escrow account for a period of time, so that either the good or the bad effect of their action would be known, and so that they could not take immediate benefit from their irresponsible actions. This amendment would put a damper on Wall Street greed. This amendment is necessary to put a damper on Wall Street greed, and it goes directly to one of the reasons why this bill is before us. This bill is before us, I think, in an inappropriate way, to deal with the housing crisis. The housing crisis was caused in part by Wall Street greed. We ought to be addressing that. That's what this amendment does, by withholding from immediate benefit those members of Wall Street who have created the crisis in the past and who may very well be in the process of creating tomorrow's crisis. I ask for the support of this amendment.
Gentleman yields back. For what purpose does the gentlelady from Illinois rise?
Madam Chairman, I make a point of order against the amendment of my good friend and colleague, because in my opinion it violates Clause 7 of Rule 16, which requires that an amendment be germane to the matter it is amending. It is not germane to the bill because it's outside the scope of the bill.
Does any other member wish to speak to the point of order? The gentleman from California.
I think that it's necessary when we take up a bill that would eliminate a law intended to help 10,780,336 homeowners, that we look to the underlying reason why the problem exists. This amendment does that. We ought not be using artificial rules that have little to do with the underlying, that prevent us from the underlying problem, allowing those rules to stop us from taking up the real problem. I oppose the proposal to rule this
Out of order.
Does any other member seek to speak to the point of order? If not, the chair is prepared to rule. The gentlewoman from Illinois makes the point of order that the amendment offered by the gentleman from California is not germane. The bill addresses repeal of a Federal Housing Administration program that provides for refinancing of a specified set of mortgages. One of the fundamental principles of germaneness is that the amendment relate to the subject matter of the underlying bill. The bill is confined to a specific type of refinancing program. The amendment seeks to address regulation of the financial industry, a matter outside the confines of the subject addressed by the bill. The amendment is therefore not germane, and the point of order is sustained. Does the gentleman from Alabama rise?
I wish to strike the last words.
Gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Madam Chair, there seems to be some confusion on what the underlying bill does and what the amendments are trying to accomplish. In fact, in certain cases, it's quite evident that some of my colleagues don't understand the bill. This bill authorizes $8 billion. $8 billion to go towards the FHA refinance plan. It has already dispersed $50 million. Now, we're hearing these claims of 10 million and 11 million homeowners. There are probably closer to 12 million homeowners that are underwater than 11. I think the numbers are understated. So let's assume 12 million. This federal program that we've dispersed $50 million to, how many American families have had their mortgages refinanced? 42. 42. Now, who refinanced those? Who paid for that? Was it the lenders who loaned the money? No. Was it the borrowers who borrowed the money? No. It was these children, because it was taxpayer money. Now, you say they're not taxpayers. No, but they're going to have to pay this back because we're spending $8 billion more every day than we're taking in revenue. There were announced earlier this week, I think the American people, they probably, and I don't blame them, don't want to really put their arms around this. But we just announced a deficit for the month of February, 28 days, that was more than the deficit 4 years ago for the entire year. We're hemorrhaging red ink. Are we better off than our parents? Most of us are. Are these children going to be better off than we are? Not if we don't start cutting spending. And the American people, those who are parents and grandparents, are crying out for this Congress to address this, and that's what we're on this floor today to do. Now, if I were one of the 12 million homeowners who was underwater, I might say, why those 42? But if I were the taxpayers, I would say, why are you taking money from me that we have to borrow from other countries, 42 cents out of every dollar that we're putting into this program? Why are you paying this mortgage down? Isn't that the lender? If a loan gets in trouble, is it up to the taxpayers to bail that lender out? Someone mentioned Bank of America. Somebody mentioned Citibank. You know, if I were Citibank or Bank of America and someone who was making their payments who was underwater who may walk off, yeah, I'd say, well, if the taxpayers will come in and take that obligation off my hands, I would love that. my district, the average home is worth $212,000. And it's the highest in the, one of the highest in the state. And actually, when I say that, let me say the community I live in, which is one of the more, it's above average in income. But the average loan here that people borrowed was $313,000, the loan itself. That's quite a loan. And to say that the taxpayers need to pay that mortgage down, it makes no sense. When these are the children, this is the generation that's going to have to pay it back. We need to get serious. We need to get serious. We need to get out pictures of our children and our grandchildren. And we need to say, do we really need to come to the rescue of these banks when they overextended loans? And how about all those Americans who are making their payments and didn't buy a house and are not underwater? Should you ask those Americans to pay to banks money that they didn't obligate themselves to? The answer is no. No to more government spending.
Who seeks
Madam Speaker.
recognition?